The long-awaited Martha Acosta book is here, people. I don't have a copy to give away, but you should go buy them because they're now available. And if you don't know Martha, that might not impress you much, but an hour from now, I bet you're buying a book somewhere because you're going to love this. Welcome, Martha Acosta.
Thank you, sir. Oh, the fancy thing. All right, great. I've got multiple glasses. I've got a clicker. I am ready. All right. So, what we're going to be talking about is something that all of us have been dealing with for a very long time. And it's this weird relationship between accountability and blame. They're like a couple of teenagers that we have been trying for decades to get away from each other, but they're just full of hormones and madness and sneaking under the bleachers. And no matter how much we try and punish this out of them, no matter how much we say stop it, we can't get them apart. So this is my attempt, once again, for us to be able to reframe how we think about accountability and blame, and hopefully we can break them up for good. So this might be a little controversial, but this is really one of the things that I'm up here talking about. Blame-free, and this is probably why this is a problem. Blame-free makes about as much sense as error-free. Blame drives shame and guilt in us, and shame and guilt are social emotions. And I'm sorry, Brené Brown, but if you look at it from a neuropsychological point of view, the reality is that shame and guilt help us survive. Shame and guilt are actually emotions that drive us to conform to our societies, and shame and guilt keeps us from doing pleasurable things that are actually taboo or bad in our societies, and it actually holds us together. So it makes sense that blame might be part of our arsenal to control behavior within an organization. So this is part of the problem, the thing that we need to tease apart. When I was a little girl, okay, I just want to start by saying my mother is Colombian. This is no shade on my mom. This is just the way she was raised. But when I was a little girl, if I would stub my toe or drop my ice cream, she would say, "That's God punishing you for being mean to your brother yesterday," or "That's God punishing you for taking an extra cookie at, dinner last night. I saw you, and God sees you," right? I don't know, maybe a few of you were raised that way too. And it was really useful. I mean, it worked. My parents never had to punish me because if they came home and I had done something wrong, I would be laying prostrate on the floor, just crying and saying, "I'm so sorry," right? It made me a very good girl, right? But the truth is, in an organization, and you as safety leaders, your workers and employees are not your kids. And we aren't really, when in an organization, we're doing something different. And also, the other issue is that blame and shame are kind of blunt instruments. And when we think about it, different kinds of groups of people, blame and shame can create a problem, and it's just as likely to encourage unsafe behavior as safe behavior. You, again, going back to teenagers, you might have a very strong sense of values in one part of your organization or in your family unit, but they go into another microculture, and that microculture might be encouraging unsafe behavior. I was just in Pennsylvania with folks from NAMO, they're a munitions company, and the Hess manager there, Chip, was a naval aviator, and he loves to torment me by talking about the impact training that he used to have. Impact basically means if you made a mistake, your officer would give you a heart punch. That was the impact. And he would say how that actually, he tries to rile me up, right? But I rile him up right back. But he is trying to say, well, yeah, that was actually really effective. I never made that mistake twice after I got a heart punch. But think about that. As safety professionals, we don't really want to be encouraging, and if there's anyone here in the medical industry, you do not want to be encouraging heart punches as a way of trying to deal, trying to create a safe organization. So this is really important. The reason why blame isn't helpful is because safety really isn't a performance. All of you who have dealt with trying to live up to negative metrics, like how many times did we not cut off someone's finger, knows that seeing safety as a performance creates all kinds of traps for you. And safety really isn't a behavior. Yes, it's sort of this very seductive lie that we have been a part of, that just because a human being is the last person in the chain of events that lead to an incident, they're the one that picked the wrong button. We have started to see safety as a behavior, as a choice. And the whole point of HOP, the whole revolution in thinking for seeing safety differently, is recognizing that safety isn't a behavior. The reason why this is so hard to tease it apart is that, so safety is the capacity to absorb the consequences of failure within an organization. An organization is a system, but what's it a system of? It's Soylent Green. Organizations are Soylent Green. It's people. It's people. It's very hard for us to separate out behavior, the idea of behavior being what drives safety, from the system that drives safety. But the organization creates this context of meaning around people, and those meanings, that meaning is emotional. It's intellectual too, but mainly it's emotional. And those emotions are the ones that end up driving the behavior. So we have to get past the pointy end of the stick, using Todd's analogy, to be able to start working on safety at the capacity level. Many of you are familiar with this, right? This is something from a long time ago. It's decades old. The idea of trying to think of accountability a little bit different. This was a first step in the right direction. Making a difference between when a mistake happens, trying to figure out if someone was unaware of the expectation, maybe they were unable to fulfill the expectation, or they just didn't perform as expected. So my question to you is this. Point your phones at this QR code, and here's a quiz. Which of these is blameworthy? Should you blame people when they're unaware of the expectation? Should you blame them when they screw up, even though, but they don't have the skills? Should you blame them, right? Okay, we got 3 people, 100% at none, but we just need more people. Go on, be honest. All right, there's some people that have said it's blameworthy if they just don't perform as expected. So yeah, that's climbing, 36%. So we're at 62% to 38%. We've got a few people that if, they don't have the capability, that too is blameworthy. All right? All of these things are blameworthy. I think that's Charles trying to rile me up. All right. Okay, so we're basically at 50-50 between none and that last one, when people choose not to do as expected. All right, that's fine. And that's really the world that we come from. If you have worked through any of these culpability matrices, trying to build a just culture, this makes sense. But if we look at number 3, and we really think about all the tools that we continue to talk about within this conference, we also have to think, wait a minute, were these people in an error-prone situation where they had all the skills, but they got bad information and they made a mistake, or things were ambiguous, or we were over-relying on their expertise? So basically, they were the last line of defense. A human being, a fallible, error-prone human being, was the last line of defense between, metal and flesh. All of these things are the things that we now are working at to recognize that human error, focusing on human error as a cause of an accident, just really doesn't make sense. But I think it also doesn't make sense for other reasons. We have to shift what we see as sort of the underlying factor. Now let's go to accountability. Accountability really isn't personal responsibility. Thinking of accountability as personal responsibility is the same kind of thinking that makes us think that safety is a behavior. It's really systems integrity control. Accountability shouldn't be laying on the human being as the last line of defense between reliability and unreliability any more than safety should be relying on the human being as a difference between being safe or being dead. So when we think about accountability, we need to think about how are we building accountability as transparency, as learning, as critical thinking throughout the whole system of the organization. So another Slido poll for you. I don't think you have to you don't have to use your phone to hit that again. But this is for you to write in. What organizational systems, in your opinion, are involved in accountability? All of them. Okay, legal compliance, that's one. Now, legal and compliance is a little bit, it can be treated retrospectively, right? But legal and compliance, you can build learning into that accountability system and make it more proactive than reactive. HR, OSHA, yeah. Process adherence, assurance systems. There's performance management. Peer pressure and social dynamics, I think, are also really important. The organizational system that I would put some of the peer pressure pieces are there. Leadership, our leadership system. Our leadership system, leaders are the people who craft meaning, who direct people towards a shared purpose, who really are the architects of our cultures. And so when you think about the social dynamics pieces, how people are going to interact, what is meaningful to them individually, who is Fred Golson? Yeah, so, right, there's so many different layers, all of these different things built into the organizational, are part of our organizational system, not just lemon-flavored Lysol and Joe. Joe's the guy, a long time ago, I put up a slide that showed a picture. There have been no accidents at this site since Joe left. Yeah, Joe's the problem. But we can also build transparency, learning, critical thinking, reflection into our organizational systems. I think some of these are coming from Todd. Yeah. All right, I'm moving on. The issue is really that blame fixes nothing. I'm sorry. I'm not shaming. I'm just critically thinking about the things that are. The truth is that blame fixes nothing. This is one of the 5 principles of HOP in Todd's fabulous book. And here's the reason. Accountability, if it is going to be a process for ensuring the reliability of our systems, right? What accountability is trying to do is trying to follow the blue line. You're using transparency and learning and reflection and critical thinking and experimentation and all of those things to figure out where the hell is this blue line and how can we ensure that the blue line doesn't hit the red line. That's what we're doing. Shame and guilt are based on a belief that the black line exists. The black line is a lie. It's a lie. But it's based on, good procedures. We're not going to throw away procedures in industries where we have regulators. But the black line is an attempt to take a picture of the blue line in a moment. Good procedures are doing that. You're looking at work that's been successful, and you're trying to build that in, right? But blame and guilt say, you should be perfect. You should have done this. You shouldn't have had that extra cookie. You should have been nicer to your brother. Blame and guilt enforce a tyranny of the black line, and it doesn't fix anything because it doesn't give you any insight into drift, deviations, whatever word we want to use, away from the reliability that we want to build into our operations. It keeps us from really being able to look at ourselves in a way where we can actually learn. There really isn't a black line. I got this from Michael Roberto, but I think it's something that has been a part of our understanding in highly reliable organizations for a long time. It might have come from Carlene Roberts, I don't know. But one thing that we really need to do in our accountability systems is recognize what kind of blue line do we have? Are we really operating in routine, well-understood work? Or did that procedure that we write create a fallacy of perfection, that things really are well understood? Or are your workers, like in the medical example in the middle, actually dealing with variable and uncertain and complex situations? Are they having to adapt because even though they're experts, their expertise is allowing them to be able to evaluate the situation that they're in and then adapt to it in order to get to an outcome that they want to achieve? Or do you actually have operations where you're actually dealing in the unknown, where there's a high level of uncertainty, and what you're doing is you're trying to create some knowledge about that uncertainty. So failure is something desirable that actually gives you some certainty. If we are able to have a strong, healthy relationship with failure and know what failure is trying to tell us, knowing what failure is trying to tell us, that's accountability. Knowing what failure is trying to tell us is accountability, because that is how we ensure reliability in our systems. So if you have failures in what you think is routine and well understood, maybe it's not there, or maybe that's an indicator of some system weaknesses, that there's a breakdown in the controls that support that work. If you're at the other end, then failure's great. Failure is the mechanism of discovery. And if you go back to the idea that safety is a capacity for people to be able to fail safely, or the organization to be able to fail safely, then your work at the, I don't know if this is right or left to you, at the right end of the screen, the work at the right end of the screen is basically creating that capacity with the expectation that people are going to fail a lot, and you do not want any unwanted outcomes. You don't want any bad outcomes out of that failure. You want to reap the good outcomes out of that failure. So this is the other controversial thing. I really don't know if the James Reason style culpability matrix is any good anymore, if it's helping us in any way. Because what it's trying to do is reason away an emotional problem, an emotional issue, right? Blame is emotional. The belief here, and it was the right belief a while ago, is like, all right, we've been seeing everything as human error. It's all about people's behavior. Well, let's start there and let's see if it really is, if it really was a choice. But it started at the wrong place. It started at the individual person. It started at the pointy end of the stick and tried to work backwards. But accountability just really sucks as a reliability system, something to help maintain our reliability, if it's retrospective. Accountability needs to be proactive and giving transparency along all of our systems. This is retrospective, and it has a false premise that safety is about behavior and that safety is about choices. No, context drives behavior. A big part of that context is emotional, it's meaning. Context is meaningful. And so if we really want to have reliable operations, reliable systems, then we need to be putting in our efforts, our accountability efforts, at the context side of things. Don't try to reason away an emotional problem. Blame is an ego defense against painful emotions. Something bad happens, it is absolutely normal to blame someone else. Blaming someone else pushes that shame and guilt away from you. Or impunitive, you're just avoiding it altogether. What? Nothing happened. I don't know. What are you talking about? Huh? Or interpunitive, which, we blame ourselves. We throw ourselves on the sword, not wanting that pain to inflict on others. We try and protect our teams by blaming ourselves. But it is not helpful, because what we're doing is we are avoiding the emotion. And the emotion is what imparts meaning. And meaning is what creates context. And the context is what drives the behavior. And if we want to have accountability, if we want to have reliable organizational processes, that's what we really need to be curious about. What is meaningful in this organization? And if the meaning is painful, we just have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. We just have to be willing to engage with that pain. So in order to manage blame, we don't say, stop blaming. We acknowledge where blame lives. Blame is a way of dealing with painful emotions. Blame is a way of dealing with things that we don't like. And it makes perfect sense to get pissed off, angry, freaked out when somebody gets hurt. That's normal. And if you don't feel that way, if shame and guilt don't work on you, you're a sociopath. We have a name for people who don't feel guilt and shame. They're called sociopaths and psychopaths. Actually, the real diagnosis for them is having antisocial personality disorder. That tells us a lot. It means that you're antisocial. If you're antisocial, that means you're outside or against an organization. You're outside of a human system, right? So, I think being a sociopath is neurodivergent. They have their purpose, but you don't really want to put them in charge of accountability. Anyway, but we don't want to give blame. We do not want to institutionalize it. Even if we're institutionalizing it away with a culpability matrix where we're trying to minimize it, it's still institutionalized. It's still in that matrix. We don't want to give it that power. We want the power to be able to process that painful emotion and move it away, because blame keeps us from learning. So I don't have a slide on this, and you can Google it. There are so many experiments from experimental psychology on decision making that show that if somebody has the part of their brain where emotions originate, they have their limbic system somehow diminished, or they have some other part of their midbrain that's been knocked out, they can't make good decisions. Emotions are actually fundamental to our decision making. You know what's a big old lie? A big old lie is that you get the emotion out of something in order to make a good decision. The emotions are necessary. The problem with having an emotionally heightened situation where you create bias in your decision making is all of our defenses around it, Bias, even positive biases, are a defense. It's an ego defense. We're trying to make our ego feel better, right? So that's really what we need to manage. We don't want to believe that emotions have nothing to do with safety. So in order to have robust accountability systems, it requires curiosity about the unknown, about the unpleasant and the unexpected. We need to be in a place where we feel okay feeling uncomfortable in order to really have the level of transparency and curiosity that we need for robust accountability systems. So we have to process the emotions that create defensiveness and challenge these narratives. So the basic system of defensiveness is that there's some trigger. There's something that happens, right? You know, Todd starts writing snot on my Slido question or something. And then I have an emotion in response to that. That emotion is based on a defensive narrative, like, you know, some sort of narrative that is kind of defending my ego or that's making it worse. You know, something around Todd doesn't love me. I know Todd loves me very much, but so something around that, you know, snot is a rejection of whatever I was trying to say. We all have defensive narratives, and I'd like you to think of a really kind of difficult time in your job where something really crappy happened that you didn't want to happen, right? Something that might have made you really angry or really sad, made you feel like, I am a failure as a safety person because this happened. And I want you to share your defensive narratives about it. That bad feeling comes with a story. The truth is that we don't really pay a lot of attention sometimes to the triggers that are around us that drive up our emotions. And our emotions come from a part of our brain that is pre-conscious. Our conscious part of our brain is our prefrontal cortex, the part that makes decisions and acts and that sort of thing. But our emotions come primarily from our limbic system. And so we're not always aware about how we feel, but we are really aware of what we think. So a way into our defensiveness and our biases is listening to the stories that we tell ourselves. These are great. He's lazy. Did anyone see me? Action paralysis. My bad. Todd is innocent. Todd's innocent. Yes, he is. Well, not often, but yes, in this case, he probably is. I work in a broken system. You never told me about that. I'm not good enough. These are totally normal. When you become aware of your blame narratives, of your defense narratives, there's a guy named Marshall Rosenberg. He's passed away, but he was at the University of New Mexico. He is really important in communication theory, particularly around negotiating, and he came up with this idea of nonviolent communication. And a part of getting ready to communicate nonviolently, that is, in a way that doesn't make other people defensive, that's all that means, is, Todd made me do this, I love that, is letting your jackals run. I have changed that in my book to let your coyotes howl. Absolutely. Oh, right? I mean, we live in the desert in New Mexico, and when you hear the coyotes going on all night, they're just letting they're howling. And what we want to do in order to process these emotions so that then we can get to a point to really think about accountability and strengthen our accountability systems when we've seen that they haven't worked, and to be able to improve our learning in the organization, we just need to give people a chance to let their coyotes howl. So, you know, if you're still mad about this thing, go out to your car and just yell, scream. That's perfectly okay. I think more people should cry at work. I do! We're human beings. And we work in organizations that do dangerous work. Meaningful, purposeful, dangerous work. And when shit happens, it's hard. All right, here we are. So I think one of the things that's important for us to think about is that systems fail and people try, right? And people try sometimes in an imperfect system. The system is people anyway, right? It's a little bit, this is kind of meta, but it's okay. But people are trying, they're trying in a system that doesn't always work, and it can be really hard to hear some of these stories. So I'm going to tell you, thankfully, a story that didn't turn out badly. This was shared by a friend of mine who's a physician who does safety investigations in a big hospital system. And there was a situation where a nurse gave a baby a dose of medicine that was 2.2 times more than that baby needed. That should make your heart sink, right? Why? Anybody guess why it was 2.2 times? The bottle labels looked identical. 2.2 is an important number. Pounds to kilograms. Okay, so they had a system that part of the input was putting in the weight of the baby to calculate the amount of the drug. The scales in the exam rooms, some of them were in kilograms, some of them were in pounds, but the system only took kilograms. So the practitioner, the provider, needed to be aware enough, right, or needed to know when to actually convert that number and when not to convert that number. And in this case, they didn't convert the number. And actually, when that provider gave that dose of medicine to the baby, the mother said, gosh, that looks like a lot, or thought, gosh, that looks like a lot. But hierarchies in organizations, you know, people with white coats on, they know more than I do. She said she thought about it, but she didn't say anything, right? So psychological safety, which many of you have heard me talk about a lot, that is an important accountability system, right? Creating an environment where people feel like it's safe to take an interpersonal risk, like speaking up against the person in the white coat when you think something is a little off. But she didn't say that. There wasn't psychological safety in that interaction. But thankfully, it was a medicine that once the provider figured out what happened, they were able to flush it out of the baby's system, and there was no harm to the baby at all. But when my friend came in and was doing the investigation and talking to other nurses and other providers, man, they were pissed. They were like, it was a baby. What the hell were they thinking? You know, they were very angry, and it was hard for my friend to be able to get the information needed to understand what was happening. But it took a moment and let those people howl for a moment. They had a moment of being angry and yelling. The investigators just let it happen, listened, and eventually they calmed down, you know, the moment passed, and then they were able to really give some good information. Then they were like, oh, yeah, the scales in the rooms are different. Some of them you can switch from kilos to pounds. Some of them are just pounds. Some of them are kilos, but the system only has it in kilos. Once they got past the emotion that that person was an idiot, then they were able to look at this in a much more constructive way, and they were able to figure out, all right, these are some of the things that we need to do to create an environment that's less error-prone and improve our patient safety. So the system failed. The people tried. There was emotion in all of that. It got processed, and people made it through. One of the best ways, the best antidote to blame so that you can create safety capacity, so that you can respond to incidents appropriately and build accountability into all of your systems, is empathy. There's 3 different kinds of empathy according to Daniel Goleman. There's the cognitive empathy, which is understanding other people's perspective, and that you need to have curiosity. So you foster curiosity in yourself. In order to feel curious about a dumbass, you first have to move through those emotions, that anger. Once you move through those emotions, you can be curious about what was their perspective, what were they thinking at the time that made that make sense. The other part is emotional empathy, and that requires you to be vulnerable. You to be willing to see other people's emotion in that situation. The fear that the mother might have had of speaking up against a doctor or a nurse or anybody in a white coat. The distress that provider might be in because they were dealing with a little baby and they weren't entirely sure if their diagnosis was correct, but they were going through the process of elimination, but they were scared, right? Or they were distressed because the baby was in distress and the mom was in distress. And then empathetic concern. Empathetic concern means understanding what help somebody needs. And that requires you to have some compassion, because what other people need might have nothing to do with what you might have needed in that situation. A really important thing, and I get pushback on this all the time with the leadership groups that I work with, is if I empathize with people, then they would just get away with everything. I would be a big old softie. No, you would be better informed, but empathy is not the same thing as agreeing. Just because you've been curious enough to understand someone's point of view and what they're thinking, that does not mean that you agree with their point of view. Just because you've been vulnerable enough to share your emotions and have someone else share your emotions does not mean that you feel the same way that they do. Just because you've taken the time to be compassionate enough to learn about what someone needs does not mean that you have the same needs that they do. But it gives you very good information to build accountability into your organization. I'm done. I'm here early. So here's the breakup. This is what we need to do. We need to build accountability into our organizations by strengthening our organizational, psychological, and operational systems, by building inquiry and learning into all of those systems that you laid out, not the booger system, but all the other systems that you laid out. How can you build learning and reflection into those systems? It doesn't necessarily have to have an app. It can be a moment to stop and think and reflect, for people to just become more curious within that system in order to continue to find more ways to strengthen your accountability and strengthen your reliability. The other thing is to not pretend that people don't get emotional. Not pretend that people don't. Yeah, that's a little too many negatives. Okay. The other thing is, let's not pretend that people don't get emotional at work. Yeah, I guess that's right. People get emotional at work. Bad things happen, people get angry. People are afraid that something bad might happen. They get afraid. All of that brings up emotional defenses, potential for blame. We work in uncertain environments. We do dangerous work where there are going to be surprises. There are going to be disappointments. And we need to manage those emotions just like we manage, not just like, it's just as important as how we manage performance. To give people an opportunity to let their coyotes howl, to just be aware that part of your job is helping people or creating the space for people to process their emotions. And also to know that if somebody goes straight to blame, that's normal. But what you want to do is get them past that point so that you can actually get good information from them and they can be in a position to learn and improve their accountability. I think that's it. Yeah, well, Charles mentioned my book last year. I said it was going to come really soon, and that was kind of a lie. I mean, a year's kind of soon, but it is actually now available. So Safety Capacity Leadership Practices for Failing Safely. So it's a bunch of touchy-feely Harvard leadership stuff, but it's actually very helpful in building safety capacity. Anyone have any questions? We've got 4
One
minutes.
question, anyone? Be brave, be fast, be now. Oh, well, default person.
I wouldn't call Brian a default person. I think that he's been a person probably for a very long time.
He's prone to ask a question. Hit it, Brian.
Does it talk now? Okay, there it
Yeah.
goes. Martha, so awesome as always, and congrats on the book. Okay, so how do you get it back if you've lost it with somebody? Like if you've taken it too far or you've made some mistakes, is there a way to roll some of that stuff back to start from scratch so that you can find a way back to a level of trust?
So you mean where we have organizations where there's been so much blame and there's been so much avoidance of emotion
That's right.
to be able to go back and leverage and build trust again.
It's like, yeah.
So
You got
I'm
it.
going to quote Frances Frye. So she's a professor at Harvard. And I really only talk a lot about Harvard because it is my job to read all of those books and to read all of those case studies and stuff. It's not that I think that they're fantastic. I mean, I do think, they don't suck. But Frances Frye is somebody that I work with, and she came up with a trust model in a reaction to this idea that trust is this super delicate little thing, that if you break it, you'll never be able to build it again, that it takes so long to build trust. Her research shows that really human beings, and Todd mentioned E.O. Wilson, and I don't know, at lunch, because human beings, we need our societies to survive, right? We actually build trust really quickly. There's something called quick trust and momentary trust. And the 3 things in Frances Frye's model is you can see that there's that trust isn't happening in that moment. You can improve your logic, you can improve your empathy, or you can improve your authenticity. One of those things might be off. And in a situation like an organization where things have gone downhill, you have a lot of power by demonstrating to them that, and this is the empathy side, that demonstrating to them that you're not in this for you, you're in this for them. When people don't trust you because you're not demonstrating your empathy, it's because you're seeming impatient with them, or they see you as trying to check your box and not really caring about their point of view. So just demonstrating, listening to them, demonstrating that you want to know how they think, how they feel, what they need, in that moment will create a great deal of trust. The other thing is authenticity that we don't really think about. We tend to depend on logic, right? We tend to give all of the interesting words that say, no, really, we're doing this differently now, and this is why. And they're like, yeah, whatever. But what really works well is being empathetic and being authentic, talking about sharing your point of view, saying, yes, I might have come to you before with a very different way of approaching an incident, and now I've changed and I get but here's why. Here's what's happened to me. Here's who I truly am. This is what I believe. This is what matters. Being able to demonstrate your authenticity goes a huge way to trust. And according to Frances Fry's research, you can do it in a moment, in an interaction. You don't have to wait for the whole organization to change. All right, I have zeros. Bye, everybody.